Jennifer's going to give a brief overview, and then we'll open up the floor to discussion. And what I'd like to do, if we can, is to take a vote on this draft today so that we can get it going and start the implementation process out there, giving us some lead time before the General Assembly gets back into session. So many good ideas are contained in this document. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, General, and I'm glad to see everybody today on the task force. I know some people are still circulating in, but I just wanted to provide a few minutes overview, summary of kind of how we got to this point. As you all know, you sort of started out this process being in a kind of issue-oriented subcommittee, and once we started going to those meetings and listening to discussions, we realized that there are a lot of themes that emerged from the issue-oriented task force subcommittees, and we have a lot of folks that are kind of in the audience today too that were able to be a part of those. So I think we got a lot of good input and a lot of thinking around these issues. I'll note that rather than sort of structuring the report in a way that reflected how the subcommittees were broken down, we instead chose to sort of list some broad principles that we saw emerging both through the conversations that we had through the task force process and in the subcommittee process. So there are, I believe, 7 really kind of overarching principles that a lot of the recommendations fall under. So the first one is creating a cohesive continuum of opportunities from intake through at least 1 year after release. And this was certainly the one that came up across all of our subcommittees to say, we need to be working together from the start when folks come in through the release. And that really, a lot of the ideas around that is creating a better bridge and a better handoff between our correction system and our community groups that are working so hard in helping the population of ex-offenders. And then we have the second one, increasing educational opportunities available to inmates and probationers that focus on the skills necessary to be successful in the current job market. So that's both an education and an employment focused recommendations. Third, increasing safe, secure housing options for former offenders. We had a task force subcommittee looking at all our housing issues, and they came up with a lot of great ideas. Providing incentives for living within legal boundaries. This was an issue that we heard a lot about. How can we incentivize changing behavior, which is a tough task to think about, but I think we came up with some great recommendations that really focus on incentivizing living within legal boundaries. Leaving prison and staying out with a clean slate, that was some ideas that were developed particularly by Ben David. And we have sixth, making government more efficient and coordinated. So we say, there's a lot to think about here with all of our state agencies that touch and affect the ex-offender population. So let's be sure that we're thinking about that in a coordinated way. And finally, educating the public. And this is something that I think we're still developing, and our meetings here and our subcommittee meetings and a lot of the work you all do individually really are a part of that. And that's just talking about this issue more and getting the word out. So that's kind of an overview for the principles, and then we have some information as well as some suggested implementation steps for several of the items. Some of them are further discussion is really necessary to kind of further flesh out all the issues and the potential paths to go with particular issues, including the expungement issue. I think we have stated in here that we want to study it further, and so I think toward the end of the day today we will maybe have a list to see who wants to participate in particular study groups so we can continue to think about the issues and decide about particular approaches. So I think at this time maybe we can just kind of have discussion a little bit, and I think the purpose here is we want to make sure everybody was comfortable with what was in the recommendations, as well as sort of there may be several things in here that because you were working on a different subcommittee you may be hearing about for the first time, so I wanted to answer any questions. I think an important note is that we really, with these initial recommendations, we what is contained within this report were really the consensus recommendations that came from the different subcommittees. And we really try to focus on at this stage on ones that were primarily budget neutral, just given the situation right now with our economy and our financial situation. We didn't want to have a report that contained several funding recommendations that just weren't going to be realistic. So I think the idea is to start working on these initial recommendations and come back in 6 or 8 months and report back and see what's been accomplished, maybe what issues have come up in the interim, and then maybe next set of recommendations based on what we've done so far.
Thank you, Jennifer, and for all of the staff for their great work on this. They have spent a significant amount of time on it. Why don't we at this point open the floor for comments? I'll tell you, as soon as we adopt these recommendations, I consider this a beginning. Clearly, we have a long way to go to bring this issue to the forefront, and I believe that we do have a good roadmap here to help us move forward. But let me open up the floor for comments on the report, and particularly ideas on implementation as we go forward. Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Attorney General Cooper. One of the things that I want to just say that I would hope that we all have recognized, and I think certainly you did with Jennifer, but I would say that the working committee that I served on has been a phenomenal group with many hours of discussion behind these recommendations that we've made. And so when I got them last week, I thought it was very interesting when Jennifer sent those out that we had the opportunity to look at all of the recommendations and to be able to kind of see where they all fit together and how many parallels there were. But I just wanted to add not just for us seated at this table, but for all the folks that worked on our committees. It was phenomenal work, and it was not easy work because we had a lot of viewpoints. We did have a lot of discussion, but we came to consensus about our recommendations. So I am very proud of the work group that I served in, as well as the other recommendations that are in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further comments or questions? Sorry, Kenley.
The discussion about the StreetSafe coordinator, the committee that came up with this option, I think is wonderful, and because of the importance of the position, and the position really is a nucleus for a lot of things that take place, and it says here that there's governance crime control funding for the position, and is there a thought that this would over time continue to be I guess my concern is that it would be a position that is dependent upon great grant funding, which I think would kind of challenge its sustainability over time. So I didn't know if there was a sense that this position ultimately would live somewhere, and I know in these times we can't talk really about permanent funding for anything, but
yeah, I think this is one of those things that needs to prove its worth. And I think that the idea of someone to coordinate all of the different opportunity services and nonprofits and to work with the Department of Corrections and to pull all this together, because there are a lot of resources and opportunities out there that just are not coordinated and just do not reach people in prison soon enough for them to be ready to take the advantage of it. So I think the idea is to piece together and to cobble together as much money as we can, prove the worth of it, and then hopefully to move forward on it. And I don't know if we've got the chair of the Governor's Crime Commission here, and I don't know if Mr. Thomas has a point of view. And Jennifer, if you got something, if you want to just come up to that mic and say something right there if you want to.
I'll just note that this position, we did seek Governor's Crime Commission funds for the position, and one of the primary roles that they'll play also over the next year is creating a training program that we can go into communities and really support, train and support nonprofit entities that would like to kind of either establish organization focused on this population or reach out in new services into the population. So the idea is really to use this position to support local nonprofit entities and then also kind of coordinate a lot of this work. So that was the goal, I think, when we initially applied for the funding, and we're in the process of interviewing for that position right now.
Great, thank you. Scott, did you have anything you wanted to add on?
Nothing other than the Crime Commission certainly is glad to assist with that, and I think Attorney General Cooper is right. After the position has been funded for a year or 2 years and proven that it works, then I guess what you were talking about was having in place a permanent position to carry out that work. And I'm sure if it meets with the success that everybody assumes it will, the Attorney General or someone would probably seek permanent funding for a permanent state position whenever the grant funding terminates.
Tom?
Comments. First, it was actually a real pleasure for me to work on my subcommittee because I worked with law enforcement and district attorneys, folks who normally when I'm in court, I'm an adversary to. It was really refreshing to have candid and productive conversations about how the court system can try to help. And the proposals we've come up with, both the clean slate proposal and the proposals on certificates of rehabilitation and what I hope would be a serious examination potentially of expungement, all I think go towards strengthening the inmates who are not the problems in a sense. I mean, we've got high-risk offenders, folks who are going to commit other offenses and go back. But one of the things we were focusing on is the folks who actually, if given encouragement and support, will not reoffend and will not go back. And so the notion, for example, of Ben David's clean slate is that when somebody gets done with the prison system, they should be done. An employer should be able to see that you are different than just your criminal conviction. And what we've tried to do, or I've tried to do, is look at how other states have done it to create a rational and meaningful step towards being able to show employers that you're worth the investment and that they shouldn't risk liability for taking you on. I would hope at some point we could also examine that for that group that goes even further, at some point they should be able to get expungements because at some point they really are no more risk than anyone else. So I think it's important that we encourage those who are striving to succeed as well as addressing those who are the more high risk at reoffending on that.
Thank you, Tom. And I think the certificates of rehabilitation are an excellent idea. That may be somewhat controversial as well, but I think that it's important for us to push forward because it provides for positive reinforcement and it provides a goal for people to attain. And in addition, it sends a message to the employment community that this person is trying and doing the best that they can. And I think the expungement discussion can come later. The issue has just been so controversial with crime victims groups and law enforcement that I think that the good first step here is the certificate of rehabilitation. And in addition, taking care of these issues behind bars with the legal system, with the warrants, before that they can be taken care of, before they get out, is a tremendous idea that you guys have worked with, because, you know, when somebody's trying to get back on their feet and get going again, and boom, here comes an old warrant. And it could have been taken care of at a previous point in time while the person was in jail. I think that's just very perceptive, and what you've done here is good groundbreaking work. And the challenge now for us is going to be making these recommendations work on the ground. And clearly that's something where we're going to have to all pull together and make sure that that happens. Ben.
I just want to echo what Tom just said.
You take some.
I just want to echo what Tom just said about our working committee. At our meeting in June, and Jennifer Epperson deserves a lot of credit, we brought 8 elected district attorneys to the table in addition to our working group to discuss, for instance, Operation Clean Slate. I spent, as I told Secretary Keller yesterday, I went to prison. I was there for 2 hours in my local district, and I would say the number one thing that emerged from the more than 50 prisoners I talked to in the yard and in their classroom was recommendation number 19 on page 13. When we're talking about whether they can exit prison without having outstanding legal issues and charges holding them back from seeking employment that could be resolved while they're in custody. NC Aware has changed the landscape, Attorney General Cooper. What I mean by that is the computer system that is now allowing sheriff's deputies primarily to find warrants across the state and serve them locally. The effect of that is that many prisoners right now at 025, the prison that's in Wilmington, have literally a jailer waiting for them as they're walking out of prison. And so what they're saying to me is, how can we resolve this now? This is becoming real to them because we've just started NC Aware in the last few months around the state, and we've particularly in New Hanover County. I propose that the implementation step that you've said, and I agree that we should be forming a committee to develop legislation on this issue. I would just add B, technology should shake hands. There are systems already in place within the court system that I talked to a number of caseworkers within the DOC yesterday. They said, if we had NC Aware, for instance, or access to that database that showed outstanding warrants, we could reach out to the various DAs or whoever it needs to be around the state, because many of these prisoners, of course, are not from our area. And they said, we just need the same system that clearly your sheriff's office has, because they're coming to arrest our folks when we're letting them out, and can we get access to that program? And I said, well, I'm going to be at the meeting tomorrow and I'll bring that up. I think this is a technology issue as much as it is a legislative response.
What if we added, if there is consensus, a B to that to say technology and NC Aware should be used? And in fact, instead of just waiting for the person, should be used while the person is in prison. Okay, should be used in this process.
As an intake, it doesn't even need to be, you know, an exit interview. That should be part of the intaking for the system.
Okay. Well, we've got the technology that, you know, that's been one of the problems, is where are the warrants, and, you know, how could the person even know about it? And if we've got the technology, we ought to use it for that purpose as well, not just serving the warrants. Very good. Gene?
Tested. On page 10, talking about the creating model residential reentry program for housing, and then number 15, public housing authorities should consider removing blanket prohibitions on housing with people with criminal histories. You talk about establishing committees. Are we going to set a time frame on an issue like this? Because, you know, with the certificate that you're giving people for being rehabilitated, that should be some evidence to the public housing.
Right.
If public housing won't take people re-in, I don't know where they're going to go. And my question is, maybe the certificate of rehabilitation could be something that could be used in the housing industry to give them a basis for being able to make exceptions to some of these blanket rules excluding people who've been convicted of a crime. And my question is that that is such a serious problem, housing, because stability is number. If you don't have a roof over your head, I don't care anything else we do, until you're stable, you can sit down at night and take a shower, get up, get ready to go to work, you're going to have problems. And so my question is, are we going to put a time frame on the creations of some of these committees to study the issues? I know there are going to be some long-term issues to deal with. The expungement problem will continue to be an issue that I agree with you that have to be studied. But this housing issue and the rehabilitation certificate, it will help employers, because employers may be looking for a reason to help someone. It will give them some cover, but the housing issue also should have so I just wonder how long.
Yeah, if you look at the top of page 11, I think we'd already coupled this certificates of relief of disabilities with the housing issue, because that can be one of the things that could help get the person there. And I think, as in timeline, we're immediately talking about formulating the legislation for the certificate of relief of disabilities or certificate of rehabilitation. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to call it. But I think that the drafting of that legislation and finding sponsors will be critical, because I think it can tie into so many other things. Now, the public housing issue is going to be one that's also going to be a federal issue, and we're going to have to contact members in Congress, and I think that's something that we'll have to look at as a broad advocacy issue, because a lot of that is controlled by federal housing laws. But being able to establish this certificate of relief from disabilities can give us one thing where we can say it's a stepping stone for opening a door to people in many areas like housing and like employment. So I think we're talking immediately, starting to talk about this issue and forming the legislation. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to pipe in on the housing piece. The recommendations that we have under the housing initiatives are actually already in full swing. The Housing Finance Agency has worked into their goals for their comprehensive planning for next year that ex-offenders will be part of their special needs category, which is their highest funding priority for the upcoming 5 years, actually, is what the plan is for. So I'm not sure if Nancy's still in the audience, but she'll be here to address, any of those questions. The comprehensive plan will be coming out in October, and will be online. But
is this the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so a lot of the home funds from HUD are coming through that agency and are used with nonprofits across the state to be able to develop housing for special needs. So the fact that ex-offenders are now included in the special needs category is a huge incentive, because those are sort of free dollars to developers to build housing with, and they will now be incented very highly to develop housing specifically for ex-offenders. The other piece is that Bill Rowe and I, and Bill's in the audience as well, are going to be speaking to all the directors of the housing authorities at the end of the month. And that's another one of the initiatives that's on the plan. But the idea there is to really talk through with them as to what their current rules and regulations are and expectations among themselves as to serving the ex-offender group. A lot of them bar ex-offenders from living even with family members upon reentry. And so we'll be having discussions with them about changing some of those rules and setting up a committee and another task force to work directly with them and getting those things changed. The federal law does not prohibit ex-offenders from living in housing authority projects. And so we're going to make, I think, some really great strides in being able to open up a lot of opportunities, not only through the funding through Housing Finance Agency, but also in our talks with the housing authorities to be able to provide more housing.
And Bill, while you're sitting there, we think we'd want to enlist your group in helping us support this certificates of relief from disabilities legislation as it moves forward, because I know that will be complicated and one that I think will need a lot of support.
And sorry, and I wanted to add to that, I think that certificate will be extremely important for the housing authorities to have. They need something to give them some sort of a sense that it's okay. Right. And I think that's going to be a really great piece for the ex-offenders to come out with that, because as everybody knows, and we've talked about a lot of times, housing really is the foundation. Housing and jobs is the foundation of their success once they get out.
Well, one of the keys is to making sure we draft this legislation correctly, because you don't want it to be so restrictive that people can't get them. At the same time, you want to mean something. So it's going to be a good balancing act and one that we need to carefully consider as we move forward. So, Kenley.
As much as I agree with Ben's amendment to add a B to number 19, I think it's only realistic that we realize that when you put technology in a recommendation like this and ask for technologies to talk to each other, then that's going to challenge Jen's initial opening discussion that we want most of these to be kind of resource neutral. So,
well, I think that the idea here was NC Aware is already online and up and running.
Yep.
And it's just who can access it and how can it be used.
That's the point.
The sheriff's offices, for instance, in every county, the 100 counties already have NC Aware. The recommendation that I was hearing from some of the caseworkers at the prison yesterday was, can we just tap into that same access? Because we will do that work if we knew who to look for.
okay. As opposed to having systems talk, have them give access to them. Okay.
Because I think the information is there. It's the unserved warrants. It's part of the information.
And I think the challenge has been probation officers have been trained. So I think what we're talking about is prison case manager staff were not included in the first round of training.
Gotcha.
And that's the area that I think we need to work on. But probation officers do have access to that information.
Other questions or comments? Tom?
On page 5, there's discussion of these reentry councils, which strikes me as a very good idea. What I guess is a question or a comment. As written, it looks like it's directed for people who are leaving the prison system and, quote, reentering. And it strikes me that the work of these councils is just as valuable for people on probation, particularly as having folks do well on probation is as big a problem, if not bigger, than folks leaving prison. And so to the extent that it's not already kind of clear from that, I would hope that reentry councils would work with local probation as well and be available for those who are not going through an active sentence but are also in need of those types of services. Jennifer?
I think this is something we have had a lot of discussion around about how to make these councils meaningful. A lot of other states have adopted similar models, but they're very parole-driven, and so it's easier to create those local, organize the local resources a little bit better. I think Nicole and I have had several conversations about how the best way to do this. One idea that we've had is to actually expand the criminal justice partnership program. Advisory boards, which right now they were created as a product of the Structured Sentencing Act to put the local resources or to sort of require that they talk for probationers. And so, you know, perhaps one idea in accomplishing this is just to expand their purview and include ex-offenders. So I think that's an idea that we're going to need a lot of more thought around on how to make it meaningful for both local, the organizations, but also the ex-offenders, I think, in making sense on the type of resource that they're going to seek out. But I think that these reentry networks have a lot of potential to really, I think in organizing those resources, it'll be easier for correction to know who to talk to and have kind of a point of entry into the communities. And another of the recommendation is the development of this resource database. And you know, some of the issues that I think correction has faced so far in producing these resource lists is just how often information changes, and they may or may not know about it. They may just hear about it. Places may go out of business, new ones may start, and it's just hard to necessarily know that type of information. I think the reentry networks will really help in providing that information, as well as the community folks know best what's a good program and what's not. I mean, quite frankly, and they'll know in their own community, you know, who folks should be seeing and who they shouldn't.
I think this also is part of my excitement in helping to harness and coordinate the thousands of people out there in nonprofit groups who are about to organize nonprofit groups around churches, who want to help in this process, who want to reach into the prison a year before the person is about to get out and start that continuum of the process. And being able to coordinate that, and I feel strongly about the Department of Corrections' commitment to this. I know it's a lot of difficulty for them to have to deal with people who are outside of the prison coming in, but I think that it's critical for us to use those resources, particularly when resources are so hard to come by, when you have these volunteers who are ready to go and who are out there and who simply need training and guidance and what can I do. They're going to be contacts to employers. It's going to be incredible if we can make this work and if we can put this into place. And that's why I will continue to say that let's don't walk out this door after we vote for these recommendations and say we've done a good day's work. We say now the work has just begun, which I believe it has. I'm sorry?
There are actually a couple of, and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, a couple of these advisory groups that communities have already established that DOC has been attending. I know Vincent Gaddy was in our group and was talking about a couple that he participates in and how valuable they are. And so the hope is that the learnings from some of these communities who saw a need and proactively did something and established something themselves, that we can learn from what they've already done. And to specifically answer your question about the probationers, I think that because the folks that are sitting on these committees are involved in not only transitional housing but treatment and services, and a lot of times the probationers are assigned to treatment and services, all those same folks are going to be at the table. And I think in some of them the judges sit on this board as well, and so there's going to be a lot of input from a lot of different directions that hopefully will support both ex-offenders and probationers through this committee.
Other comments from, let's get to task force members first, and then we'll have comments from outside. Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to first thank you and Secretary Keller. I think you have done an excellent job, and I fully support this. And actually, I would even say I'm excited about it. In terms of process, though, I wonder, for instance, number 18 on page 12, can you speak to the process that you envision?
I think that Jennifer is going to form a group of people to look at it. I'll let you talk about that, but clearly it's something that needs further discussion. Usually there's a piece of legislation introduced in the General Assembly pretty much every year, and it doesn't go very far, doesn't go anywhere. I think that the adoption of the Certificate of Relief from Disabilities is a good stepping stone into this issue of expungement. But Jennifer, I'll let you talk about what you foresee occurring.
Well, I think there are several indications here where folks should be talking, a committee should be formed. I think particularly things related to legislation, I think we got to start that right away so we can really start that discussion, have something before or right, toward the beginning when the legislature comes back. I think there are other recommendations for conversations to be had or committees to be established. And what I'm going to do is once these recommendations are adopted, then I'll be in communication with everybody and just kind of gauge interest for who would like to be on what committees. I think, what sounds like is a little implicit in your question is maybe a little bit of prioritization. I mean, there's a lot of things in here, and I think we'll start working as soon as possible on everything, and then particularly, like I said, the legislation and things that can be through administrative action started right away. But I think the plan is to maybe within the next 6 or 8 months for this task force to get back together and kind of report on the status of everything that's been all these recommended action items, and just sort of be able to report back and figure out where we are with things, figure out if there are challenges that weren't foreseen or next steps forward.
And I don't know if we'll we'll have to talk to the governor about whether she would want us to officially present this report to her, but potentially she would, and potentially we'd want to invite all of you all to come and let's present it to her as part of the process of getting this ball rolling. We'll find out whether that process can occur, and then just keep us together with some continuity during that period of time. Other questions or comments from within the committee? All right, we had a couple of people outside of the committee, and I think, John, you had a mic so that we can hear people. Be glad to hear from people outside of the committee.
Hi, my name is Daryl Atkinson. I'm a staff attorney at the Office of Indigent Defense Services, and I worked on the committee preparing, the subcommittee preparing inmates for transition. By way of disclosure, I'm also a person formerly incarcerated, so I'm intimately connected to these issues, both on a personal and professional level. On page 8, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points on increasing educational opportunities for people who are currently incarcerated. Number 8, ensure that training for jobs coincides with demand. I think number 8 and 9 are hand in hand. Currently at our office, we're working on a project with the North Carolina School of Government where we're cataloging all of the collateral consequences that attach to criminal convictions. Very often, people will receive training that they later on have to receive a permit, certification, or license to practice in a given vocation. Criminal record history often cuts against someone obtaining a license. So I think it's essential that we enter into memorandums of understanding with these licensing boards that if someone goes through DOC training as well as addressing underlying substance abuse issues, whatever the risk and needs that have been identified, if they go through that training, that they have a rebuttable presumption of fitness when they go before the licensing board. Otherwise, it's a poor allocation of our resources. We would be training folks up to go to practice in a given vocation, and they would be summarily denied a license. So I see 8 and 9 going hand in hand.
Thank you very much for your work on the subcommittee, and I can foresee potentially the certificate of rehabilitation playing a role potentially in that whole area as well. Yes. Let him give you the microphone.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What has come to my attention as far as DSS, as far as mental health abuse, you got a person that's convicted of a felony, that got a felony conviction outside of North Carolina, is permanently banned from receiving these benefits. So if you have someone that's presently incarcerated in the state of North Carolina who may have a prior conviction in another state, how can they get help if they're not going to be able to get the assistance from DSS?
I don't know the answer to that question. Jennifer or anyone else, do you know?
I think, there are certain kinds of benefits that obviously the federal government has restrictions on, and they set the eligibility criteria. And then, I think one of the recommendations I know was to just maybe ensure that our prison case managers are, aware of all potential benefits that may be available, either state or federal, and that they are assessing the inmates for what they may be eligible for in connection and conjunction with DSS.
If I may, maybe I didn't say that. If you have a drug-related offense, because of the federal ban of assistance to states, I mean, the states have the opportunity to opt out of the federal ban, but North Carolina seems to play both sides of the fence, like in a sense, because someone that's a felony, even a North Carolina resident, happens to go to Virginia and catches a drug felony and wants to come back home to his home state, he's ineligible for food stamps, Medicaid, and those provisions because of the 1996 federal ban on drug felonies.
Well, that's something that we can certainly look at and consider. I'm not familiar with that issue, and if you'll give us the information, we'll take it and look at it and consider it. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you for your input. Yes.
My name is Sarah
Wait, can you wait for the mic? Thanks.
My name is Sarah Ann Wilson. I'm from Pittsboro, North Carolina, and I'm a proud member of Alcoholics Anonymous for the past 25 years. And I'm also the mother of an incarcerated person in North Carolina. And I am one of those statistics. He is one of them. He has fell in every loophole. He was incarcerated for a year. He returned in less than a year. He's facing charges. Every single thing that's wrong with our system has happened to my family. And I would like to address number 2 on page 4. Throughout this process, I have found the interaction between from the probation officers were, well, okay, I'm digress. I'm gonna stick right to this. I'm nervous, sorry. That this reading of number A, for me, lacks the teeth of, as a member of AA, it is getting harder and harder and harder for Alcoholics Anonymous to take meetings into the prisons. So there's now all these training requirements which are top secret to, you know, the volunteers. You know, AA is an unorganized thing, but there's millions of people who have gotten sober, and the prison needs us. You know, the state of North Carolina needs us to reach out to these inmates. So I would it's too hard, and this doesn't sound like to me y'all realize how hard it is. So when you're talking about establishing a training program, is it going to be an easily accessible training program that, you know, that your everyday people can participate in? Right now it's gotten very, very difficult, and that also leads on that other one. C at the top of page 6, it does say there should be eased for those community services. I'm also a member of St. Bartholomew's Church in Pittsboro, and we've been trying to do some prison ministry and different things, and we have actually had our priests denied access to Harnett County Correctional, and now they've changed it to Wednesday onlys. As we speak, it's getting harder every day. And so if you want the community to help you, we need you to help us and understand that it's very, very difficult right now. And this isn't something that needs to start 5 years from now. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, you want to address that issue?
Yes, ma'am. I spoke with Ms. Wilson earlier today, and let me just say, one, I'm going to look into her specific situation, but generally AA is available in our prisons, and as is true in any prison system, there are going to be some restrictions on who is able to enter and under what circumstances. So I'm not sure exactly what the problem was at Harnett, but I think that that's something that she and I can talk about.
No, that's not a specific. My experience goes all across the state. Where there used to be 6 and 7 people taking a meeting in, now there's 1 or 2.
Okay. Well, again,
all over the state.
Well, again, I think that probably what I'm going to have to do in your case is get the facts that you're concerned about and try to address your issue. Because at this particular point, I'm not aware of the problem. So I'll need to talk with you after we've. I'm more than happy to talk to you after we finish our discussion here. Okay. I understand that you have an issue, and I want to get the facts, and I'll get you an answer.
I think one thing that I think your issue has been a lot my issue is that we want to get more community involvement in helping people reintegrate back into society. And I will say the Department of Correction has been very responsive to our entrees on that. They've got certain things they've got to deal with making sure the prison is safe. But at the same time, clearly there are a lot of people out there who want to help and want to help people reenter successfully. And I think that the coordinator that we're talking about will help facilitate more discussions with prison wardens across the state. And this process is going to make that more robust. And I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to start this task force. This is one of the reasons why I went and talked to the governor to start with about this, is that I saw so many good things going on outside of the prisons to help people, that we could help bring those people in. So I appreciate your point of view. Other comments? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name's Leo Rupert. I'm from the Carolina Justice Policy Center. And I was on the Sentencing Commission that helped draft the legislation for the Criminal Justice Partnership Boards, which you referred to. And you may or may not know that that legislation permits those boards to look at the back end of the system as well as the front end. And the reason that people didn't do that was that there were no dollars allocated to the back end at that time. So you wouldn't have to change any legislation if you wanted to use those as a vehicle, which in many communities, I think in Durham, for example, might be a very good way to go. In others, it may not. It does at least connect it with the county government, and I think that's a good thing. The other thing I would say, though, is that just to be very aware and careful that these are tough economic times. Some of these things really are going to require money. It's not going to be enough to just pull people together. We can do a lot at the local level and are doing a lot, but some things are going to cost money, and it's not going to be enough just to have the committee there for people in the system to call locally and find out what's the best placement for every person. So just be aware, I think, that at some point this is going to require some resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Dennis Gaddy, Executive Director of Community Success Initiative. I just wanted to bring out, regarding funding, just yesterday, the state of Virginia, they were successful in receiving some dollars from the Second Chance Alliance that they connected with local dollars. So the dollars don't necessarily have to come from the state. They combined a $750,000 grant they got from the Second Chance Act along with some local dollars that they also matched to create a $1.5 million initiative to do the exactly thing that we're talking about doing in North Carolina, and the governor signed up on that yesterday. So Jennifer, I can get that information. I mean, you already have it. So, but I thought that was a good idea, that all the dollars don't necessarily have to come from our budget. We can apply for second chance dollars as well.
And I think we have we not?
We haven't applied at this point. We were waiting for us to go through these processes that we have underway, so we know what we need to apply for. So between justice reinvestment and the opportunity to reinvest dollars there, and going through this process and understanding where are the gaps and where, because the Second Chance Act requires comprehensive evaluation, as well as doing something that's going to make a huge difference. And we just didn't know what that was. We can write a grant, but what would we be writing it for? So we hope that out of these processes, we can definitely pursue something that's comprehensive for the state.
And in fact, I think we have, the state has submitted a Second Chance Act application in the past, which wasn't funded. So we feel like we're going to have, but that was before this whole process. So we feel like it's really going to strengthen our application to have gone through this.
Yeah, that was just for the record. I just didn't want everybody to think that there were no dollars available and that the state was our only option.
Yeah, no, I think I would be definitely interested in hearing about their.
We're not going to let Virginia one-up us.
On page 6, one of the priorities is increased contact between offenders and their families. And I see some really good stuff as far as trying to place inmates in institutions that are near their locality to facilitate visitation. Just reflecting back on my own personal experience, another key area of contact is telephone. And telephone rates with regards to collect calls and calling home for people who are incarcerated are extremely high. And they almost incentivize the family not to keep contact with their person because the collect call rates are so expensive. So I wanted to ask, has DOC or the powers that be considered entering into a contract with the phone provider that has less usurious rates, for that matter, because the phone rates are so difficult and so prohibitive on keeping contact with inmates and their families?
Anything else?
I thought I had my superintendent here who was going to take this one and run with it, but I guess the buck does stop with me. the issue of the phone rates is one that that certainly came to my attention as soon as I was appointed into this position. And as I understand it, one of the reasons that the rates are high is because of what the system is geared to do. In addition to allowing for contact between the inmate and the family, which is the primary concern, it is also used to support a number of programs that support the inmate to try and make that transition easier. Those things that are not provided through the General Assembly. As you might expect, there are not a lot of constituents within our 40,000 inmates, and so they do have to pay for a lot of their programs, and a lot of that does come out of the phone system. And of course, there's also a built-in security for that for that phone system. So it's not just it is, as you might expect, it is not a regular phone system. It has to have that security. We have to be able to go back and monitor those calls if that becomes necessary. Also, so that's a built-in factor also. But it is not something that we're not sensitive to. And I know from meeting with other correction administrators throughout the country that we all have that same issue. But before I sit down, Larry, how many volunteers do you have at your facility on an annual basis?
I'm superintendent at Craven Correctional, which is in Craven County, and to address the volunteer issue, we are very receptive to volunteers, and it's a continuous battle when we start to approach with the programs with volunteers, because as we look at the safety of the volunteers as they come into the facility, the training programs that we require, and each administrator is challenged with a different set of individuals that are coming in. So some prisons, it's fairly easy to have your recurring volunteers. Other prisons, you have new volunteers coming in all times. But at Craven, at least 4 nights a week, our visitation area is overflowing with volunteers and with inmates. The problem we have more volunteers coming in that we completely fill up our visitation area. And it varies from different religious church groups to AAs to the NAs. So space becomes a problem as to the amount of groups that you can get in, because as we go into the prison systems, these programs we can't carry back into the housing area. We have to have space in the front areas of the institution that are safe for the individuals, because we have to remember as we go into prisons the risks that are associated, and so it's a constant battle to have that. But I know that the volunteer program is very valuable. It's valuable to the inmates. As I go around and talk to inmates, that's a topic that comes up very often. I have a lot of inmates that want to remain at Craven because of the programs we have. I have inmates that come into Craven, and as I go around, they'll want to go back to the unit they were at because of the program. So that tells me that across the state, we have a lot of prisons that are doing a good job with volunteers. But I think as we go back and as we meet with DOC and with Mr. Keller, where we stress in these meetings the importance of volunteers, you know, that's something with internal procedures that we can definitely look at and ease some of the entrance problems that we have. We also we have problems with some ex-offenders or some of their family members with the different type of contrabands that they try to get into prisons. just cell phones itself, cigarettes, marijuana, so it's a constant battle. And on the telephone issue, that is a valuable tool for the inmates to use. Just over the past few years, DOC has relaxed a lot of our controls on the telephone so that we used to be very restrictive to allowing only 2 calls per month. The majority of your prisons, we have unlimited calling. And the cost factor is a problem. And as Mr. Keller was saying, one of the problems that we had was with other inmates requiring inmates to make calls for them. So we had to go to a system of a voice recognized so that when the call is made, if it's not the inmate that's calling, then that call is disconnected. So there's, as Mr. Keller was saying, there's a lot of internal control that we had to add with dealing inside the facilities.
All right, are we ready to vote on these recommendations? Jennifer, did you?
More thing, it's not required before the discussion, but on the back of your report, you see Appendix B, current accomplishments, and it's a blank page right now. Before we finalize the document, we would like to have some sort of record of the kinds of things that have been accomplished in task force so far. And I think a lot of that are things that you all know that maybe we don't see, connections that are made. We'd like to, as much as possible, be able to kind of have that be a part of this report. So if you could just email me or call me or even write it in right here and I'll put it into the document. Unfortunately, our DMV commissioner is not here, but as one example, they've gone through the process of revising their policies and procedures with regard to inmates who are seeking driver's license. And that's been a very great product of just our conversations here. I've got copies of those policies if people would like to see them. I know our Ben David's group subcommittee looked at those and asked questions about them.
All right, if there's no further discussion with the changes that we have talked about and instituted, are we ready to vote? All right. All in favor of the approval of the recommendations say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The recommendations are adopted. And until next time, we are adjourned. Thank you.